good to see Brother Hunter and Sister Jamie back with us. Glad they had a wonderful weekend, wonderful trip out there visiting your parents, correct? Well, glad y'all were able to make it back safely, and glad to have y'all back with us. A couple of announcements before we begin. Prayer of thanksgiving for Sister Dot. She is at home right now. She's out of the hospital. She's back at home, and she still has a long way to go as far as physical therapy and rehab and everything and getting back on her 2 feet. But the good thing is that the doctors were able to figure out what the issue was. It had to do with just bad, horrible side effects from the medicine that they gave her. What was the name of it? Lipitor. Okay, they gave her a high dose of Lipitor, which was causing a bunch of negative side effects. And so, thankfully, it wasn't anything worse. And so, we can say a prayer of thanksgiving and continue to be praying for her as she's at home, recovering, needing our prayers. We also have news on Sister Linda Klaus's brother, Jackie. How's he doing again, Sister?
Well, he got the staples and the stitches out from his hip surgery. It had been broken in 3 places. So he's still got about 8 weeks before he can put any weight on his legs and all. And he is doing a little bit of physical therapy, but not much, and it wears him out. But hopefully day by day he'll get a little stronger.
Good deal. Excellent. So let's continue to be praying for Jackie. And we're thankful to see Sister Glenda Sue back with us. I know that last week I was informed that she's been having back problems. How are you feeling today, Sister?
Yeah, I was down on my hip.
Down on your hip? Well, glad to have you back with us, Sister, and glad to see that you're doing much better.
I'm glad to be here, believe me.
How's Sherry doing?
She's doing okay. She's just worried.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she's possibly going to have surgery, and she wants to make sure she doesn't get sick before then.
Gotcha. Understandable. All right. We'll continue to be praying for her and her upcoming surgery as well.
Yeah, keep her in your prayers.
Yes, ma'am, we will. Absolutely. Those that we're continuing to be praying for, Charlie Hager, Brother Sonny's son. Tim Decker with his cancer treatments, continuing to be praying for him. Praying for Brother Richard as he is out traveling in California with all the forest fires that have been going on there. So let's be keeping him in our prayers, his father in our prayers, as well as just all the victims that are just going through the horrific fires that have been taking place in California. So let's be praying for that situation as well. Continue to be praying for Sue Treadwell, Henrietta Acock, Brother Sid, our nation, Sister Agnes, Sister Jean, and victims of COVID-19 as well. Are there any updates that need to be made on our prayer list?
I guess I can ask for this. I don't know how many of you guys know Ashley, Jamie's daughter, Jamie Cook's daughter. She's in the hospital. She's had a really bad, she had a fall. And she couldn't use her hands for a while, and her legs are kind of dead. And I'd just kind of like everybody to pray for her, not only just for that, but to become a Christian. That's Joey Cook. Y'all remember Joey Cook. That's his daughter.
We need to put Rosalind Adams on there. Prayer list. Rosalind.
Yeah,
Rosalind. What
What
happened?
have y'all heard about her?
It's really bad.
I don't know everything.
I don't know either, just that
Okay.
it wasn't good. So it's who's that one? Rosalind used to sit back there. Rosalind Adams.
Is she in the hospital or?
They took her to the doctor. She was having dizzy spells and found out that she has something terminal, some type of cancer. I think that's terminal.
Really?
So, and it's
there any others that we need to put on the prayer list? Well, let's go ahead and say a quick prayer for these two individuals that we have added on our prayer list. Our Father in heaven, we come before you just thanking you for this time that we have right now. Any time of the day that we're able to actually come to you in prayer through the only unique and begotten Son of yours, Jesus Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life. And Father, you know all things. You are here with us right now. Your presence is with us. And we lift all those that are on our prayer list that we've been praying for. Sister Dot Humphreys, Jackie Vines, Sherry, Charlie Hager, Tim Decker, Richard Decker, Sue Treadwell, Henrietta Aycock, Sid Scudder, our nation, victims of COVID-19, Sister Agnes and Sister Jean. And we like to add two more in our requests. Ashley Cook, who's in the hospital, who recently fell. And not only do we pray for her physical well-being, but we also pray for her salvation, that she may come to you, Father, that she may come to your Son, Jesus, who is the resurrection and the life, who is the Good Shepherd, who is the door, who is the ladder to heaven. We ask that you be with her parents as well, that the whole family may come to salvation, the whole family may come to your Son Jesus, and that they may put him on, to be buried with him, to have their sins washed away, to be saved, and to be added to your kingdom. We also ask a prayer for Sister Rosaline, who recently discovered that she is terminally ill with a very bad cancer. And it breaks our hearts knowing this. For the church family to find out that a fellow sister has received not good news on behalf of her physical health. But we're thankful to know that Sister Rosaline is in a right relationship with you, that she is in your Son, Jesus Christ. That brings us joy. But we ask that you be with her, be with the family at this time with just the news that they received. We ask that you be with each and every individual that is on our mind and on our hearts, that are constantly on our thoughts. We lift them all to your care, Father. We ask that you place them underneath the shelter of your wing, Father, and tend to them and care for them and love them. For it's our prayer through your Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen. All right, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 34. Genesis chapter 34. I will say that if you're like me, this chapter, hopefully that we read it at least once every day for this past week, was a pretty tough chapter to swallow, mainly because of just the incident that takes place in chapter 34 regarding the defilement of Dinah. And who is Dinah that we read about in the text?
Leah's daughter.
Leah's daughter. And not only is she involved in the incident that takes place, but who else gets involved?
Her brothers.
Her brothers. Her brothers. Her brothers seem to be a little bit, not a little bit, I would say extremely upset over what takes place and what happens to her here in chapter 34. When you look at verse 7, verse 7, 34, it says, the sons of Jacob had come in from the field as soon as they heard of it. Well, heard of what? Get to that here in a few moments. And the men were indignant and very angry because he had done an outrageous thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter. For such a thing must not be done. So right here, verse 7, This verse tells of the act of Shechem and the anger of Dinah's brothers. These two things will be the cause of the retribution that takes place at the end of the chapter. So I've titled this chapter, Genesis 34, to be Dinah's defilement. Dinah's name is found 6 times in this chapter alone. Verse 1, verse 3, verse 5, verse 15, verse 25, and verse 26. And the word defiled is used 4 times in verse 2, verse 15, verse 13, and verse 27. Dinah's defilement. So we see that there are quite a few characters that are involved in the situation here that takes place. But the main characters that we're going to kind of keep an eye on for this chapter are Dinah, Shechem, and her brothers. Dinah and her brothers, as well as Shechem. So what is it that Shechem did to Dinah? We read it in verse 7. He defiled her. In what way?
He took her and he laid with her. You shouldn't have was
He took her and laid with her. And just as the brothers stated in verse 7, such a thing must not be done. Now, the text does indicate and tell us that Shechem defiled Dinah. But the question is, really, how did he defile her? Did he rape her? Or did he merely convince her to have sexual relations with her outside of marriage? A lot of writers or commentators, I would say, indicate that he, in fact, raped her. But the word doesn't necessarily... Go ahead, Scott.
Well, verse 2 says he did it by force.
Yes, verse 2 says he did it by force. And Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her. He seized her and lay with her and humiliated her. Okay? He forced her. He seized her, the text says. And he laid with her and humiliated her. But I want us to look at, real quickly, this word defile. Some of the words that define the term defile give us some insight. The word means either to abuse, afflict, deal hardly with, force, humble, weaken, oppress, be bowed down, mishandle, or to be humiliated. So, some who may have taken the side that, okay, well, he didn't necessarily rape her, but the fact is that he defiled her in the way of sense that he dishonored the marriage bed. What does Hebrews chapter 13 verse 4 say? Let marriage be held in honor and the bed be undefiled. But however, what I always say is that when we determine what a word means, who gets to determine that? What gets to determine how a word in the biblical text is used? Starts with the C. Context. Remember, context determines meaning. And from what the context, as Scott pointed out in verse 2, how should that word be looked at or used in the context? Go ahead and say it, Scott.
It's clearly rape. It's
Yes.
force.
Yes, it's clearly rape.
Well, it says he violated her, so
Yes.
I would say that was rape.
Absolutely, yes. The context tells us that this defilement is not only just defiling the marriage bed, but also defiling herself. He violated her. He forced her. He held her down. He raped her. He humiliated her, took away her innocence, destroyed her virginity. This is how she's been defiled. And it seems that the brothers, like any other brothers who truly love their sister, are extremely livid. I would say they are livid beyond rage. They are wanting to take matters into their own hands, and they don't hesitate one bit. They quickly act on it. Like I said, I'm sure just like what any brothers would do. But there's some great lessons that we can learn here from chapter 34. As difficult as a reading as it was, again, I mean, it took me a couple of stops because just reading it and seeing the horrific action that he had done to her was just making me angry that I had to put it down a little bit. I had to put it down because one of the things that every Bible student should do when it comes to reading and truly studying the text is to see it from the original reader's mind and perspective, putting yourself into their very own shoes. And when I was doing that, boy, I was getting angry. I was getting mad. So as difficult as the reading may have been for some, there are some lessons, many lessons that we can learn here from chapter 34. So before I kind of share or go on with the list of lessons that I discovered from the text, as always, I like to leave the floor open for any types of discussions or any types of discoveries that you found from chapter 34.
One of the reasons that people are confused with that is because going down a little bit further, it says that he talked kindly to the young woman. So that's a little bit on the confusing side, you know?
Yes. He talked kindly to her, just as what any type of individual who's a rapist would often do. They will try to manipulate the mind of that person.
Yeah, I guess you're right there.
That's a lesson right there, is manipulation. Scott?
Well, and to go along with that, women were at this time viewed essentially as property.
Absolutely.
And so he's basically thinking, I'm going to take this piece of property, and then maybe he stopped and realized, you know what, her family's a wealthy family, they're influential, because if you look at verse 1, she's visiting with the daughters of the land. So he may not have realized at first that she's not just one of the common folks that his dad is in control of. And so then he's talking to her, trying to persuade her, oh, you like me, I like you, we should be together forever. And trying to make it so that one, it's going to minimize the trouble he's going to have later, and two, this, in the minds of the time, valuable piece of property is going to be transferred to him with minimal objections.
That's right.
So we have to remember to look at it in the cultural context as well.
Absolutely.
That's how they viewed all of this when this was happening. Women didn't have the same rights and freedoms, and so she's viewed as a piece of property owned by her parents. And at the beginning, when she's visiting with the women of the land, as it says here, he may have just viewed her as one of the common folks that his dad basically runs roughshod over. I mean, you look at the rest of the story, and he and his dad can convince the people, we get to do anything we want. And so there's possibly this little hint of fear at, oh, wait a second. And she said, you know, I'm Jacob's kid, and he goes, oh, I'm in trouble because he's not one of us, and we don't get to do whatever we want to them. And so they enter into these negotiations afterward. And he thinks it's going to be easier if we can convince her to go along with it.
Absolutely. What are some other discoveries from the text? Sister Linda Vernon, you are reading from the King James, right? Can you read verse 7 from the King James?
And the sons of Jacob came out of the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved, because he had wrought folly in Israel, in line with Jacob's daughter, which thing ought not to be done.
Wrought folly in Israel. Now those are two words that we normally don't use in our day-to-day conversations, wrought or folly. What does wrought mean?
Brought about.
Brought about, yes. The word folly could be seen as foolishness, is the idea. foolishness or that which is morally wicked, concretely a crime in this case, is how that folly is being used in the context. What these men had committed was an act of crime. The Canaanites, because remember, Shechem was a Hivite. Was he part of God's chosen people? Absolutely not. The Canaanites were cursed people. When you go back to chapter 9, verse 25, they were off limits to the people of God. So not only had Dinah been defiled, but a crime had been committed against the nation itself. This was a crime that had been brought into Israel. Of what this whole situation that came about was a crime that was committed, morally speaking, but also a crime against the nation itself, because they were cut off from God's people. At least that was what the curse was about back in chapter 9, verse 25. And also the hint of the fact that God didn't want them to intermarry or be involved in any sort of relationships with the Canaanites. But so far, we haven't seen that being done. You look at Esau and his wives and everything, and so they necessarily were not following God's plan in regards to that. But the purpose of not wanting to intermarry is because of all the different idolatry, all the different idols that they worshipped. And so, God did not want his people to intermarry with the Canaanites. They were cursed people. They were cut off from God's own people. And so seeing here later on the negotiations that they try to make to try to get her alongside, try to get Dinah alongside of Shechem, we see Jacob, when they were in that negotiation, what was Jacob's response to this? Silence. Nothing but silence. You think he did a good job in his responsibility with that? Absolutely not. Perhaps due to his silence of not doing anything, his sons took action. They were angry with what had happened. The father just sat there, not saying a word. So now they're thinking, okay, well, if Dad's not going to do anything about this, we're just going to take matters into our own hands. And sure enough, they did. After what they did, what did Jacob say?
He was angry with them, I think.
He said, "You made me a stench in the sight of these people."
Mm-hmm. Say it louder, Scott.
"You've made me a stench in the sight of these people. They all hate us now, and they're going to come hunt us down and kill us."
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't know what Jacob was thinking at the time, because his sons reacted rather quickly.
Mm-hmm.
His mistake was probably not talking to his kids and said, "Let's figure out what to do."
Yes.
He just responded with no answer, and so the kids ran off to do whatever they wanted to do instead of taking a measured and appropriate response.
Absolutely. What's interesting is that seeing that this crime has been committed, the crime has been brought into God's own people now, and we see that Jacob's silence, not sitting down with his sons to talk about this, we also see that morality and criminal behavior seems to not bother the worldly. When you look at verse 8, and it says, "But Hamor spoke with them, saying, The soul of my son Shechem longed for your daughter. Please give her to him to be his wife." Hamor persists in asking for Dinah's hand in marriage to his son. It seems that this crime that they've committed, this immoral act, didn't tend to bother them at all. It seems to be the case even today in our nation, does it not? crimes, immoral acts seem to not bother many that are still living in the world. I think this is a good to the upcoming election that's going to take place here. You know, one of the Christians have sincerely asked me the question, with this upcoming election, should Christians be involved? If so, how can Christians be involved? Who or what can Christians do in order to figure out the right candidate to pick? Well, we're going to actually do a lesson on that. I'm putting together a sermon for that here within the next couple of Sundays to give. And I think it's very relevant to what's going on in our nation. And I think it's very relevant when it comes to honoring the governmental system that God has put in place. Romans chapter 13. That's going to kind of be our main text we're going to look at here. But part of that, to kind of give a little bit of a sneak peek, is looking at the moral values of each candidate. Yeah, they may not be a genuine New Testament Christian, but they can uphold certain biblical, godly, moral principles that are found within the text of God's Word. And I think this is one of them right here, is morality. What are the moral values that we see within those who are going to be ruling our nation? I think this is a good, important discussion, a good, important topic for us to consider when it comes to this upcoming election. Before I go any further, Scott, did you have your hand up? I thought I saw it earlier.
No, but along those lines, what we see here is we see that the people of this region aren't honoring the guest privileges. So in that culture, in that society, in that time, if someone was a guest in someone's home, they were supposed to be protected at all costs.
Correct.
We see that in the story of Lot and his family in the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. We see that later at the end of the book of Judges when we see a story with the Levite and he's visiting some people in the tribe of Benjamin and some bad things happen. But the concept of somebody being a guest or a visitor in your home and being honored and protected and served in any way, shape, or form, the very beginning of this story, we see that that's not happening here among these people. Because Dinah goes among them, and that, which is one of the most basic aspects of their culture, is not followed. Mm-hmm. And then you see that the leaders are morally corrupt, and that all the people are following them in moral corruption. And so when we sometimes say, well, it's kind of rough that, Simeon and Levi killed off all the men of the entire town for this, you stop and realize that the rest of the text indicates that the entire town is full of corrupt people who are supporting this behavior. Mm-hmm. It's not just that one man did it, it's that one man did it because all of the men support the concept. Mm-hmm.
Good thought. That's a very good thought. With that in mind, let's go ahead and kind of transition into the whole setting, the whole scenario that takes place with Dinah's brothers and what they do to the city. So we see that their anger was beyond rage at this point. They decided to take matters into their own hands, and so when they went into the town, who did they specifically kill? The text gives descriptions on the acts of what they do. When you look at verse 25 to 29, it says, on the third day, when they were sore, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city while it felt secure and killed all the males. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city because they had defiled their sister. I think that's the point of what Scott is bringing up here, is the fact that they all accepted this immoral, corrupt type of behavior. Verse 28, they took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field. All their wealth, all their little ones and their wives, all that was in the houses, they captured and plundered. We see that wrath is cruel and anger is outrageous. From this right here, from this anger that was building up between the two brothers and them taking action by slaughtering and murdering in almost an entire town. They slain all the males. They took all their animals, all their cattle, all their wealth. It even says all their little ones and their wives. All that was in the houses they captured and plundered. This is what anger produced when it's not controlled. I once read a church sign that said, anger is one letter short of danger. I like that. Isn't that not true? Anger is one letter short of danger. Anger, when it is not self-controlled, anger, when it's not in its right context within us, what could it possibly lead to? This isn't the first time that we see this happen because of anger. Going back all the way with Cain and Abel. Cain was jealous, led him to envy his brother. Jealousy led to anger. Anger led to hatred, and hatred led to him murdering his own brother. In this case, it led to two brothers murdering almost an entire town. Now, this is where the difficult part comes in and where it gets personal with me because, as I said, when it comes to understanding and looking at it through the eyes of the original readers, seeing and understanding where they're coming from by their culture, but putting yourself basically into their own shoes. I had to ask myself, if I was in their shoes, Simeon or Levi's, would I have done the same thing? Ask yourself that question. If this was your own flesh and blood that it was done to you, would you have done the same thing? Our actions performed in anger can have severe consequences.
That's a hard problem, I can tell you. I'm sure most of you already know probably. My oldest daughter was molested when she was 9. And I wanted to kill him. I thought about it. I thought about hiring somebody else to kill him. I mean, that's how deep it went. So, I can definitely understand this. The only thing is that this girl evidently was older, but still, it's a hard thing.
I'm sure. I'm sure it's a very hard thing. That's never happened, to my family, so it's hard for me to be able to comprehend, where you're coming from with that. But I've seen and experienced it with other family members, counseled with other family members who have suffered this very act of what you went through and of what Simeon and Levi and Dinah have gone through. In fact, I remember seeing a video on YouTube of a woman standing trial for murdering her youngest boy's rapist. Rapist. So she killed the man who raped her youngest child. And she stood there with a big smile on his face saying that was one of the best things that I enjoyed, was being able to kill that man who raped my son. But now she, because of her actions, is not going to be able to see her youngest son anymore. She has life in prison now. 200 plus years, I believe that's what the sentence was. Basically life in prison. And so, consequences of her actions, in her mind, it may seem to try to justify, because we even see, when you look at verse 31, look at verse 31. It says, but they said, should he treat our sister like a prostitute? They make a good point. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to justify their actions of what they did. Anger will often seek to justify itself. And in many cases, the poor choices that we make due to our anger, as much as we try to justify it in our mind, does it still make it right?
No, I don't.
I know
It
it has
doesn't.
a little girl, she's almost 11 now, but she was 9 when she was molested.
Mm.
And I know that she was really close to my niece and her husband. And I know how they felt, what they would like to have done to this man, but they went through the proper channels and now they have custody of the little girl, they're raising her.
Mm.
And he is in life without parole.
Life without parole. Mm. Scott, you have your hand up?
Yeah, when we think about the consequences here, I think there are a couple of ironic twists that happen.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one is Shechem and Hamor think what we're going to get out of this is we're going to get all the women folk of Israel as our women, and we're going to get all the herds and all the flocks and all the property of Israel for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And the end result is all of their women and
Yep.
herds and flocks end up with the Israelites. That's ironic consequence number one.
Yep.
But then the other one is that Simeon and Levi think by taking action, we are going to show that we are in charge.
Mm.
We're the bosses of our family.
Mm-hmm.
And you combine this with what Reuben's going to do in a couple chapters,
Yep.
and you find out that Reuben, Simeon, and Levi, the 3 oldest sons of Jacob, all lose their prominence, and it falls to Judah, the 4th son.
Yep.
And this is one of those interesting twists. If you look at their ultimate inheritance in the land of Canaan, the 2 tribes that don't get a block of land are Simeon and Levi.
Yep.
Neither of those tribes get an inheritance in the land of Canaan. Each of them gets a cluster of little cities here and there,
Mm-hmm.
but neither one of them gets a block of. Simeon's entirely contained within the land of the tribe of Judah. You get this city, this city, this city. You get these few cities inside the tribe of Judah.
Mm-hmm.
And Levi gets a few cities on the east side and a few cities on the west side, but you don't get your own land either.
Mm-hmm.
And so, while trying to secure their family's future, what ultimately ends up happening, and it never says that's a direct consequence of this,
Yeah.
but those 2 are the only 2 that never get
Yeah.
a chunk of land.
Exactly. And it's an interesting consequence, when you look at it. When you put it all together. Oh,
That's a great point because it doesn't really address what they did right there. But you said going back to Cain and Abel, if you look at Cain killing Abel, one of the first stories of revenge is after that, where Cain starts telling God, well, I've killed Cain, or Abel. He was obviously a likable guy. Someone's just going to turn right around and kill me.
Mm.
That's what he was worried about. And
Mm-hmm.
God said, the punishment I just gave you, if somebody kills you, I'm going to do even worse.
Mm-hmm.
So, from the very beginning, God has been against revenge.
Yeah, it is. It's a very interesting way when we look and see it from that point of view. Because you're right on that. He protected him by giving him what? That mark. So that when other people see it, they won't try to kill him or murder him. So we see a way of God's protection towards him, even though that he committed that treacherous crime of murdering his own brother. But then we also see the punishment on behalf of Cain, knowing that when he sees the mark, it reminds him of what? The act of killing his own brother. So we sort of see not necessarily holding a guilt above his head, but it served both ways, as a way of protecting him, and also a way as a reminder of the mistake that he made. and to not make that same mistake ever again. It's a good point and a good connection when we put all the pieces together. And interesting consequences, very ironic consequences that we see. And verse 30, then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household. So that was on Jacob's mind after the whole incident that took place. So now he's no longer silent about the issue, and he finally ends up being worried about what's going to happen to he and his family after the quick actions that took place by Simeon and Levi.
Maybe Jacob was saying, leave vengeance to the Lord.
Yeah, he could have been definitely implying that. Leave the vengeance to the Lord. And that's a lesson that's the overall lesson for us today, is that vengeance belongs to God. Vengeance or revenge is his business, not ours. Paul even states that. Romans chapter 12, beginning of verse 17 and following. Vengeance belongs to his. It's his business, not ours. Scott?
And tying into what you were saying earlier, you're going to be speaking on Romans 13. He then says in Romans 13, right after that, Romans 12, it's the government's job to punish evildoers.
Yes, punish evildoers. That's
So
right.
that's why God created governments.
Yes.
So there will be somebody whose job it is to punish the
Law and
evildoers.
order.
It's not your job. It's not my job. It's whoever we've put in place as the government.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Are there any other remarks or discoveries from the text before we go ahead and end our class session? Real quickly, another thing that kind of caught my attention is that Scott brought up earlier about the cultural customs of that time, right? What I find interesting is that they did, even though it was in a cunning and manipulative way, they did follow the cultural custom of talking to the father. When you look at verse 4, it says, so Shechem spoke to his father, Hamor, saying, get me this girl for my wife. Now Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah, but his sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob held his peace until they came. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. Sons of Jacob had come in from the field as soon as they heard of it. And the men were indignant and very angry because he had done an outrageous thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing must not be done. Verse 8, but Hamor spoke with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him to be his wife. So looking at verse 4 through 8, we do see their way of the cultural custom of what? Approaching the father, concerning about the whole marriage thing, but yet at the same time, they were quick to honor the cultural custom in a manipulative way more than honoring the will of God. That's pretty interesting. Shechem did not honor God's law of having a sexual relationship only in marriage. He took advantage of that. He did not hold marriage in honor. He defiled the marriage bed. He took her innocence and raped her. But he did honor the customs of the day by having his father seek Dinah's hand in marriage for him. They're quick to follow their cultural custom, and not so quick to honor the will of God.
But it also sounds like, you said that the brothers went and got Dinah out of Shechem's house, so it sounds like he had her in his house for, don't know how long. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and as Scott, mentioned earlier, saying is that they, at that time, the women were seen to be as like a piece of property. So in a way, they stole the property. They stole their daughter. They stole her innocence. They stole her virginity. They stole everything. Everything of what they did was a heinous, disgusting act, a crime against her, against the entire people. And yeah, when we look at it as the whole and put all the pieces together, it's tragic. It's tragic.
It's very tragic because it has bothered my daughter all of her life. Mm-hmm. And she's 57 years old now, and she's still, 50 years later, she's still bothered by it.
Yep, absolutely. It does horrific long-term effect on the victim. PTSD, like through the roof. And I've counseled many, specifically on the Navajo reservation, that have gone through that. Many who are in their 50s and they're still having nightmares and PTSD. It's tragic. It pains and it hurts me. It hurts me deeply to see so many victims who have gone through that and who are still going through it. Are there any closing remarks? Well, appreciate everyone's discussion, everyone's participation. Again, it's one thing I really love about Bible class. But next Sunday, if the Lord wills, Hunter is going to be bringing us the Bible class and continuing on through his study on Romans. I know it's going to be a great study. I'm looking forward to it. So appreciate his willingness to help and to serve in any way that he can. And the following Sunday, we will pick up with chapter 35. Thank you all so much.